John?
Hi, Kathy. Hi, everyone.
When can we go back to having in-person meetings?
We
Does anyone
can.
know?
Well, it depends on which cohort you're in, Kathy. Are you an A or B?
Well,
Not
that's
on
gonna be too
Wednesdays.
hard. I want to be in both of them. I'll go half and half. I got lots of time. I'll go to both meetings, okay? No matter what cohort, I'll just go. So seriously, when can we start meeting in person again? I hate this.
Kathy, we're about to start the meeting, so the executive order extends through March 31st, just so you know, for
Oh,
electronic meeting for public.
March 31st?
March 31st, yeah, that's the rule. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Looks like our attendee list is slowing down. So I will begin this meeting of the Grand Rapids Public Schools. This is a work session. Welcome to our guests that are here with us this evening, staff and otherwise. So Ms. Lewis, will you please begin by calling the roll?
Yes. Ms. Davis?
Here.
Dr. Flores?
Present.
Dr. Flores?
Present.
Ms. Grant is coming. Ms. Lewis is here. Reverend Matthias?
Present.
Mr. Ross?
Here.
Mrs. Williams is on her way. Is that correct? Dr. Baker?
Here.
President Chotke?
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. May I have a motion, please, for approval of the agenda this evening?
So moved. Support.
Okay, so that was Reynard, and who was the support?
I heard Ms. Davis
Davis? Okay.
or Dr. Flores, either or. Perfect.
Okay.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right, motion carries. This evening, we have two action items. The first is the contract ratification for the paraprofessionals or GRPS. Do we have any discussion or question regarding this action item? Okay, hearing none, may I please have a motion for approval?
Motion to approve.
Support.
Mr. Ross and then Mr. Baker. Is that I heard? Dr. Baker? And if you'll call the roll, please, Ms. Lewis.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Dr. Flores?
Yes.
Ms. Grant is coming. Ms. Lewis, yes. Reverend Matthias?
Yes.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Mrs. Williams is on her way. Dr. Baker?
Yes.
President Chotke?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next is one item on our purchasing agenda. Do we have any questions or discussion? All right, hearing none. May I have a motion for approval, please, of the purchasing agenda?
Motion to approve.
Support. All right, Mr. Ross and Ms. Davis, thank you. Ms. Lewis, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Dr. Flores?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis, yes. Reverend Matthias?
Yes.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Dr. Baker?
Yes.
President Chotke?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, great, thank you. Next on our agenda is our special order of business, and this evening we will continue the work of our equity statement, equity policy, and we'll receive the report of our equity audit from our guest this evening, Brian Esbacher, who will join us in just a bit. So I want to take us back to October. That's the last time that we had a chance to work on this collectively as the Board of Education, and that was at our board retreat, where our consultant, Deborah Keys, helped us get to 3 versions of an equity statement. As I was thinking about this evening, I was reminded of the Golden Circle. I know that we reviewed that in the past. Ms. Brown, I think you brought it to our attention as well, Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, where you start with your why or your purpose, you move out to your how, and then to your what. As I think about this equity work, the statement, the policy, and the subsequent strategic plan that we'll talk about later this evening, follows that pattern. The statement, the equity statement, is our purpose. Why? What do we believe? What is our purpose here at Grand Rapids Public Schools? And what do we believe about equitable outcomes for our students? Then we move into the how, which is the policy. We take that statement and then we put it into policy of the district, so the district understands how to do the work or the process that we've set forth. And then from there, it's the what. So those very specific actionable steps, and that's the strategic plan and the goals that we set forth. So tonight, we're going to begin with that statement work. In board docs, you'll see the 3 versions that we drafted at the board retreat. And those have been synthesized into one equity statement. Has everyone had a chance to review that, or would it be helpful if I read the synthesized statement?
Would you read it, Jen, please?
Yeah, be happy to. So what our consultant put together for us, having listened to all 3 statements, is this. The Grand Rapids Board of Education recognizes and celebrates the diversity of our student population. We are committed to ensuring all students receive an equitable educational experience by removing barriers resulting in a world-class education, so they may become productive and contributing members of their community. The Board of Education will remove barriers for students by providing access, opportunities, and resources to enrich individual learning experiences. Furthermore, the board will monitor equitable outcomes through the creation of policies embedding equity into the district's culture, affecting budget, best practices, curriculum, staffing, professional learning, and extracurricular activities. So I'll open up for board discussion at this time. Based on what you heard in that synthesized statement, do you feel like we're at a place that statement is how we want it to read? And I'll lean on Ms. Davis, who's been working on the policy committee too, leading that work, and our staff too, who've been leading and working alongside us in this work.
President Shaki?
Yes.
I think the statement is too repetitive. I think we said the same thing several times, just in a few different words. And I think we can probably get it a little bit more focused.
Sure, a little more concise. Okay. Others, do you feel the same way?
How about, yeah, I see that. So the second, we are committed to ensuring all students receive an equitable educational experience. If we got rid of by removing barriers, just those 3 words, and then a comma, resulting in a world-class education, then that gets rid of the repetitiveness in the second sentence where the Board of Education will remove barriers. And I thought that first sentence, that was kind of needed a comma or something anyway.
Great, yeah, I see that. Okay.
Should we get in that first sentence that world-class education and not put so they may become? I don't know if that, because that's defining education, not so much equity. I don't know. I mean, I'm just a thought to shorten it a little bit.
I agree. So that sentence would instead read, we are committed to ensuring all students receive an equitable educational experience resulting in a world-class education, and then remove the end part. Dr. Baker, is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, do others think that that's a good idea?
Yeah, I could go with that. I think that does shorten it. I mean, not that the goal is just to be short, but the goal is to be clear. And sometimes shorter helps good clarity for sure.
I
would
still
find
think,
education somewhere else. Sorry, Kathy.
no, I just think it's too long, because all we're doing is making a statement, and I think we've covered a lot of things several times. And I just think there's a better way to put these 3 drafts together and come up with a better statement.
I actually like the next 2 things, though. The Board of Education will remove barriers by providing access. And then the next one is the board will monitor the outcomes.
Yeah.
So those are 2 different things.
You could put those 2, but you could make that one sentence.
Well, yeah.
Remove barriers and monitor.
Yeah, those don't, my point is that those two sentences are not duplicative. They're two different things.
Yeah, my only thought is I love everything that the statement says. I don't have anything against what it's saying. I think it's true to what we as a board came up with. I just wonder if all of the hows are needed in a statement. Does that make sense? Or if that is like, in addition, we have how we are going to do this, which is a lot of the work that the district has already been doing. I just don't know if it belongs in the statement. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does to me.
Yeah, I kind of differ with that. I kind of view the how that the statements as being very specific, dealing with how we're going to ensure that these equity pieces are in fact accomplished across the board. And I think that that we should leave them both in there. Again, I do agree that it's repetitive in the first sentence, and perhaps you might even take that whole thing out. But I think that we do need to be fairly specific as to what areas we're going to be expecting equity to actually flourish.
Then you have providing access, opportunities, and resources. And then you have best practices, curriculum, staffing. That's sort of a repetition there.
No, I disagree. I think that the Board of Education will remove barriers for students by providing access, opportunities, and resources. And then the second paragraph, the final sentence, the board will monitor equitable outcomes. I think that that's a crucial part of this, is that we will be held accountable for equitable outcomes, not just providing opportunities, right? I do think that I think that it gets a little bit through the creation of policies embedding equity. That seems like awkward, because either we monitor equitable outcomes, comma, okay, I'm wordsmithing here. Monitor equitable outcomes, comma, by embedding equity into the district's policies, culture, budget, curriculum, staffing, professional learning, and extracurricular activities.
I like that, Tony.
Policies, yeah. Sorry.
I hear a little bit of what I guess critique has been at the end of this, that maybe that's more policy specific. So the equity policy might say we're going to monitor, adjust, and amend maybe budget, curriculum, staffing, professional learning, extracurricular. Should that be in our sort of belief statement, the equity statement, or is that more what the policy statement should outline? Should we just take that piece out and just talk more about our commitment to monitoring and adjusting?
So would you suggest then that after the furthermore is what we would leave out?
We got to leave monitor outcomes on it.
I agree.
Okay.
So
I'm just wondering what Jen was thinking.
Well, here's what I'm thinking. Here, the people that are going to read this, other than us, or maybe even including us, are going to be community members who are going to come to us and say, I think we have inequitable outcomes. And they're going to say, we know that because your budget doesn't reflect equitable outcomes. Your hiring practices don't reflect equitable outcomes. You don't have the right curriculum. So to some extent, it's saying this is a list that says, well, this is what the board will be accountable for. We are accountable for policy and budget. We may not be in charge of hiring, but we do direct. We do have to have a policy that tries to be equitable in hiring and curriculum. So I don't know. That's what I think, that we would list the things that the board should be responsible for.
I was thinking the same thing, Tony. Like, we're in charge of policy, creating policy, which really encompasses a lot of what this is saying. Like, we can monitor a lot of the things that go on in the district by creating policy. And also, I think, you know, we have our hands in providing the access and opportunities and resources, because we're ultimately the ones that are going to be voting on different things that are purchased, et cetera, correct?
Yeah.
So I agree with Dr. Flores. I'm just worried that with something so long, it's just going to become something that's not remembered or usable on an everyday basis. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, and I agree. It could be shorter. I mean, I can see where we could shorten it up. But I think that we need to refer to the areas of the outcomes that we want to make sure are impacted, and including those that we just mentioned, and you know, whether it's HR or budget or best practices or curriculum or professional learning, all of those, and extracurricular activities. I think that's really the substance of our monitoring actions, and what a policy ought to embed in terms of what it reaches, you know, or what it impacts. But I think actually that whole first paragraph can practically be removed, and just a very short statement that says, you know, that the Board of Education, the GRPS Board of Education, believes in diversity and equity, and in order to ensure that we have diversity and equity, you know, we need to remove barriers and provide access opportunities in the following areas, or
Yeah, I agree, Jose. Mhm.
you know, just something a little more concise, and I think that we could do that. We could wordsmith that.
Because the first sentence, you know, the Grammar Report recognizes and celebrates the diversity of our student population. I think we have to keep that. And then we can go into the things that everybody else thinks we should keep, because I think we should keep a lot of other stuff. But I mean, the recognition and the celebration, I think, is really important in this statement. And then when you come down here to, we will remove barriers for the students by providing the access, and we will monitor the outcomes.
Yeah, that's not that bad. The changes that we made. Furthermore, the board will monitor equitable outcomes by embedding equity into policy, budget, and overall culture. Just something like that.
So what makes our education a world-class education?
That should be defined somewhere else.
Yeah, that does not necessarily work there.
I mean, we can put it here, but we shouldn't define it here.
To me, that's more of a mission statement, kind of a,
Right.
a reference. The same thing with the first sentence. I really think this is a policy that is addressing equity. Am I correct? And that's really where we ought to make the bold statement of, you know, the GRPS Board of Education is committed to diversity and equity. And then in that commitment, we want to ensure that all obstacles are removed, obstacles and barriers are removed in all of the comprehensive areas that impact equity, such as human resources, our policies, our best practices, our budget, our curriculum, our staffing, and so on.
Okay, I'm going to take us line by line and see if we can get to a place where we feel confident in our statement. So, first sentence, the Grand Rapids Board of Education recognizes and celebrates the diversity of our student population. Would we like this to lead in?
I do.
Yeah, I'm suggesting we can remove that.
I'll fight you for that, Jose.
There's no need to fight on it. I just
No,
think that it's more of a mission statement type of a repetitive.
No, I don't think,
Movement.
no, I don't necessarily see it that way.
I agree with Kathy. I think we should state our intentions directly, and to not do that can set us up a little bit down the road.
Could we say the Grand Rapids Board of Education is committed to ensuring all students receive an equitable educational experience as our first sentence?
I agree with that, Tony. That's more policy related to this specific policy.
Yeah, and I think from there, we could then really just jump to the about removing barriers for students who are providing access opportunities, et cetera. You know, I think,
So Tony, are you suggesting then we
Así
go
que Tony, tú sugieres que
the Grand Rapids Board of Education
la
is
Departamento de
committed
Educación
to
de la GAP esté
ensuring all
conforme.
students receive equitable education experiences? Was that the way you thought we
Yeah,
should?
that would be
Esa es
the
la manera que tú piensas que debemos de hacerlo.
We
I
can bring
can accept
interpreters
that.
too.
I could live with that.
Está bien porque yo lo entiendo, pero
Yo también.
I'm gonna text Craig to let him know that there's an issue, because let me see what I can do with that. I apologize for that.
I'm working on it right now, Dr. Roby.
Okay, and then also I'm gonna text you about something else too.
It is inclusive to include the Spanish interpretation.
Yes.
Yeah. Equitable.
Okay. Where are we on this first sentence? We're divided.
I mean, I do think that in the first statement, it could be either added or stated elsewhere, assuming that we all agree that we are a diverse community anyway, but now we're coming to the realization that that we're aligning our policies and equity on a real basis of evaluation. And so our committees and all of that reflect how we're sifting through that. We're asking all these kinds of questions at the various committee levels and school and so forth. So I think we can tweak that so that we can get at the a concise statement.
See,
Okay.
if I may, Jen.
Yeah.
Okay, I just think the Grand Rapids Board of Education recognizes and celebrates the diversity of our student population. So as we recognize that, as a result, then we have to do these other things, you know, that our recognition of our diversity is pushing us towards more equity. That's what I see that sentence saying. But Tony doesn't see it.
Well, I can go either way. So I mean, with this, I think that to some extent we have two sentences on the table for our first sentence. One is the Grand Rapids Board of Education recognizes and celebrates the diversity of our student population, or the Grand Rapids Board of Education is committed to ensuring all students receive an equitable educational experience. So that's the two choices we have. And I would vote for the second one, but I would feel perfectly fine if we chose the first one.
Let's work on the rest and come back to the first. And we'll see it both ways, and then maybe we can decide from there. So I'm going to move on. And I think there is, to the points before, some opportunity for bringing together these next two sentences. So here's what I'll suggest, and then let's talk about it. We are committed to ensuring all students receive an equitable educational experience by removing barriers for students. Oh, wait, never mind. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
So we're taking out world-class education, right? So we are committed to ensuring all students receive an equitable educational experience. That's our commitment.
That would either be
First.
So we do have to decide if we're going to, that would either be the second sentence or the first sentence. So we could say the Grand Rapids Board of Education recognizes and celebrates the diversity of our student population. We are committed to ensuring all students receive an equitable educational experience.
Right.
So, I mean, that would work too.
I think it does.
Yeah.
And then because we do have removing barriers in world-class education, we don't need that. So we can just.
We can even make it one sentence, Tony, and say, the Grand Rapids Board of Education recognizes and celebrates the diversity of our student population, and thus we commit to ensuring all students receive an equitable education.
That's good.
Yep, I like that. Present tense.
That works.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm typing as we do this, so let me just make sure I got it right.
Yep.
The Grand Rapids Board of Education recognizes and celebrates the diversity of our student population, and thus we are committed to ensuring all students receive an equitable educational experience.
Yeah, I said it in more present tense, and thus we commit.
Thank you. Okay,
So then we can cross out the rest of that sentence.
so then on to the third, which is the Board of Education will remove barriers for students by providing access, opportunities, and resources to enrich individual learning experiences.
Could we just end it after resources?
Yes, I think we can.
Yeah, I like that too.
Because obviously those things will do the rest.
Right.
Sort of a repetition, yep. Get rid of that, Jim.
Hi guys, this is Christian. I'm wondering if sorry, I was having trouble getting on, but I was listening over the phone. I'm wondering if at some point, Jen, perhaps you can share your screen so we can kind of all put eyeballs on it. I think Craig would have to give you access, but once we've kind of gotten to a good point, that might, oh, okay, here we go.
You seen it all right, everybody?
Yes.
Great. Perfect. Okay. Now you get to watch my typing, which is stressful.
Sorry.
No, just fine. Just forgive.
Hey, Jen.
President Shockey, do you mind making at the very bottom of your screen a little bit larger so we can see it a little bit
Oh,
clearer?
sure. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great.
Ms. Shockey,
Yes.
how hard would it be for you to, do you have the drafted statement available?
Oh.
Because now I can't pull it up. Because
Yeah. Of course. Okay, give me just a second.
If it's hard, not a big deal, but
I didn't have that open. I had it printed, so forgive me as I'm gonna stop that for a second. Let me pull that up. Won't take but a minute. Okay. All right, I copied it from a PDF, so give me a second while I clean this up. I'll share my screen while I do that so you can look at it.
thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. All right. Okay, there you go. Your original's on the bottom.
Yay.
Our original's on the bottom. All right. So we are on to the last sentence, right? Furthermore, the board will monitor equitable outcomes through the creation of policies embedding equity into the district's culture, affecting budget, best practices, curriculum, staffing, professional learning, and extracurricular activities.
Now, see, there's where I think it's repeated because down on the bottom in that last sentence, we have effective budget, best practice, curriculum, staffing. So it seems like that's a bit of a repetition. So we can go with, we could leave that out and leave the last sentence. I think Tony was the one who liked that last sentence. True, Tony?
Yeah, but edited. So how about this? Furthermore, the board will monitor equitable outcomes by embedding equity in its decisions affecting policy, budget, and overall culture of the district. It's just the only thing that there's kind of a redundancy by monitor equitable outcomes by embedding equity. We could say the board will monitor outcomes by embedding equity.
Well,
But I'm not sure that that's the same thing.
Yeah.
you know, I'm with Dr. Flores as far as that last statement and all those particulars. I think it's stronger by specifically stating those things. You know, I'm not a fan of truncating those things. I think all of them are very important. And I think they deserve the attention to stand on their own: best practice, curriculum, staffing, professional learning, etc.
I actually agree. Even though I was talking about it being shorter, I think we have shortened it quite a bit already. And I think if we're gonna list specific things out in this last sentence, it would be beneficial to list all the specific things, not
Although I'm
just
not-
pick and choose.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not a big fan of the word best practices. I think it's just pretty vague.
I don't think that's needed.
Yeah, but everything else, curriculum, staffing, professional learning, extracurricular, I think that that's all good.
Mhm.
I would like to suggest as well with regards to the last sentence, we're talking about, it seems to misstep when we says the board will monitor equitable outcomes. Well, we haven't even created them. So we haven't created the space for the equitable outcomes to take place. So we kind of talk about it in this sentence with regards to the creation of policies. I think we should put the creation before monitoring the outcomes, if you get what I mean.
I agree there. I agree
Yes.
there. And I would like to focus also on the fact that we're suggesting that we would create policies again in there. And I don't think that we need to repeat that because this is the policy that we're creating.
Sure.
Yep. Agree.
Is this the policy or is this a statement?
This is the statement. So this is our belief, our purpose, which will inform the policy, which will go into greater detail about the areas in which we will do the work of creating, monitoring, reviewing, implementing. And Dr. Gunnell and Ms. Brown, please stop me if you think that we are not going in the right direction here.
Well, I mean, I'm assuming that once this draft is either finalized and we adopt, that then we superimpose this on every aspect of our district, and we then begin to look, and obviously it's brought to us, and vice versa. Our community responds to it and says, "Hey, look at this piece," and then it's weighed against that statement, and then we begin to work at it. Right?
That's right. Yeah, especially as we talk about strategic planning, which we will later in the meeting tonight. We will be embarking on our next long-term strategic plan. So having this statement, this belief system about equity will inform those areas that we focus on as priorities for our strategic plan. So yeah, the statement informs the policy directs the priority areas for the strategic plan is the way that I see it.
Okay, I'm totally like starting from scratch in this last sentence with something, if I can just throw it out there.
I'll write it. Yeah.
Furthermore, the board will create and monitor policies that ensure equitable outcomes in, and then we list those things. In district culture, budget, curriculum, staffing, professional learning, and you know what I mean?
Could I suggest that we say included, but not limited to?
I like that.
But I think that was one of the things we thought we could, it had been repetitious, and that creating and monitoring could go together.
Well, I guess I'm going to muddy it a little more because I think we should say creating, implementing, and monitoring, because you can create all day, but if you don't implement, you don't get any difference.
I like that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're right.
I will say though, is it the board's role to implement?
You're right.
No.
I think, but to your point though, Ms. Williams, I think the monitoring sort of, I won't say forces the district's hands to implement, but monitoring, us having the monitoring language gives our commitment that we will hold the district administration accountable for implementation.
Right, so we could say that, in that sentence, furthermore, the board will create and monitor the implementation of policies or policies and the implementation of practices that support those policies.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's why you have doctor in front of your name.
I think after it says equitable outcomes, I feel like there needs to be something there that will ensure equitable outcomes in district.
In all areas, or in the following areas, let's see here, the following areas, including but not limited to, in the following areas, including but not limited to budget, because, you know, Dr. We'll say Tony, he had suggested human resources, and I didn't see human resources in there in the original statement. That
Well, it's staffing.
Yeah, okay, staffing.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's human resources. Yeah.
Create and monitor implementation policies.
So furthermore,
So again, we're
in
in that statement as it is, we are acutely monitoring and looking, and when staff come before us in the board meetings, the expectation is that they have thought of this and then report on aspects of it, and if we have questions, obviously back and forth, but that's the understanding, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, yes, this keeps us accountable to equitable outcomes.
When we list all of these things in this final sentence here, this furthermore, the board will create sentence, is the sentence prior to that necessary?
The removing barriers.
Because I don't know, I feel like a curriculum's not listed there, but like curriculum and extracurricular activities are opportunities and resources. Do you know what I mean? I just don't know if they're both
Right.
needed.
I understand. Yes, I do, Kim.
Catherine, that's what you've been. That's what Catherine's been telling us all along, that it was redundant.
So I'm just going to
Oh,
move
thanks,
I'm
Marina.
going to move this furthermore statement up, since this is the one we're liking here. Okay, what do you think of the remove barriers? Stay or go?
And you know, there are unintentional consequences or results of stuff that are implemented. Hey, I think we should do this, or staff or administration said we're going to do it like this, and then it comes to the board, and the board says, hey, wait a minute, did you think of this? So there are unintentional things that come up, and I think, and that's okay, because that's the work.
Well, if it's brought to us and it doesn't include equity as part of it, then we would not accept that particular suggestion, whoever gave it to it, if it hasn't been done through the lens of equity. I think that's what we are trying to say here. So if they bring it to us and it doesn't appear to be that they've considered those options or considered the equity situation, then we probably wouldn't approve it.
Because we have this statement here that says we're going to
Yes.
monitor it. So
Yes.
so I like the remove barriers. Partly, I think it fits into the visuals that we have of explaining what equity is. So we can say everybody has a 6 o'clock PTA meeting or whatever, but that is equal, but it's not equitable, right? So, well, how we can remove barriers to parent involvement. That's what our work is. So I like that.
Yeah, I like it too. I see the case for redundancy, but I also like that we recognize that there are barriers, oftentimes unintended, but that we recognize we will, if we're doing equity work right, we're exposing and then eliminating barriers, and it's a continual process.
Agreed. I don't think we can, I mean, we could remove it, but I don't think it's, I think it's better with it than without it.
Now, Jen, what you have up here, that top paragraph, is that it? Or is this other sentence going to work in there? Or have we worked that other sentence in?
So I moved up the furthermore sentence that we were
Oh, okay.
wordsmithing into
Okay.
this. So the top paragraph here, this top
Okay.
statement is
That would
where
be
we're at right now.
what we'd approve.
I like that. I like that top statement. I think it's all encompassing, but you know, it's just my opinion.
Just throwing something else into the pot.
Mhm.
Our mission as a district is to ensure that all students are educated, self-directed, and productive members of society. So I'm wondering if that part was kind of tying it into the mission that we took out right away. I'm not saying that it's needed. I just think it does fit with our mission.
This down here.
Productive, contributing members of their community. Yeah.
Okay.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that's probably what the intent was. I did see that the wise Sharon Pitts did put that in the chat about possibly connecting to the mission. I don't know. I guess I mean, where will this this statement live? I mean, will it live in documents that also has the mission statement kind of in that same document? You know, and if so, you know, I guess will they kind of go hand in hand? When you see one, will you see the other? And then if that's the case, then I don't know if we necessarily need to include it. If that's not the case, then
Yeah.
okay.
Well, and I would say that this statement right here does hold true to our mission. So if they were in conflict, that would be a problem. But
Yeah,
I
and they're
think
not
what
in
we are
conflict,
saying
though.
definitely holds true to our mission. So I don't know that it's needed in it. I do think that we can confidently say that our students will be, you know, a great part of a productive member of our society, even more so because we're committed to this.
Yeah, and I do think this equity statement as we have it now, at least definitely, like you said, it supports the mission. So I think it's okay as is, but
I agree.
I was going to say though, going back to the human resources language, human resources encompasses so much more than just staffing, but just also how that staff lives and moves and in the district. So I'm wondering if we can replace staffing with that language. I mean, replace human resources with
for staffing. Yeah.
Yes.
I support that.
Yeah, I'm with
I
that
agree.
too.
I like
Yeah.
that too, because
It
it
makes
has a
it
lot to
richer.
do with, it has a lot to do with communication between district staff and the community is all embedded in the human resources. So
Yeah, good call.
Okay. Well, I'd like to read it aloud once. Let's see how it feels, how it fits, okay? The Grand Rapids Board of Education recognizes and celebrates the diversity of our student population, and thus we commit to ensuring all students receive an equitable educational experience. The Board of Education will remove barriers for students by providing access, opportunities, and resources. Furthermore, the board will create and monitor the implementation of policies that will ensure equitable outcomes in the following areas, including but not limited to budget, curriculum, human resources, professional learning, and extracurricular activities.
I just have a couple of comma things at the end.
Oh, you're gonna, yeah, right.
Right.
This is why I didn't want to type in front of our teaching community.
No, I can't type, so it's good you do that. You know, just
Yes.
commas.
We have the right folks to fix those errors of mine. Thank you.
We'll let Sharon do it all.
Are the words right? Do they feel right?
They are for me.
Okay. Wonderful. I'm going to stop sharing and we'll talk about what's next. Well, that's a big deal. I'm proud of us all. This is a step in the right direction to saying what we believe and what our purpose is as the Board of Education. So thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is the equity policy. So as a matter of process, let's talk this through. Now that our statement's been written, I believe policy committee meets a week from Wednesday. Is that right, Ms. Davis? Yes. So I think the work here would be to include this into the policy work and then let the policy committee start to fine tune those details of how this translates into the actual work and process of the district. And then the policy committee can bring back to the board, of course, their recommendations for what that should look like. Does that sound right, Ms. Davis, Ms. Pitts, my other policy experts? Okay, excellent. Great. Okay, from there, we have a presentation this evening on our student enrollment and equity audit. So, Dr. Roby, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce.
Question
Yeah, Reverend Matthias.
before we move off of this topic. So how is it going to move through our district? So what the policy committee meets and adopts and so forth, is the expectation that cabinet members and then I don't know, school principals, and timeline wise, what are we looking at? Are we looking at 3 months, something happening or less, where we say, hey, we've had a chance to munch on it, you know, the district. And so here we're coming back to say, here is how this is beginning to show itself or sift through our system.
It's a great question. I think the timeline will evolve in tangent with the strategic plan. Our timing of making our statement and creating our policy will allow us to really inform those specific goals. So what I anticipate is that as we as the board work with our district leadership on what those goals are moving forward, we'll lead with equity. So if the policy says something specific about budget, for example, as we then prioritize in our strategic plan what we're going to spend our money on, you'll see equity as kind of leading that conversation around strategic planning. And then into the other areas too, you know, what are those long-term plans around curriculum or human resources and other things that will dovetail into that overarching plan. And we don't have that timeline quite yet on the strategic plan, but we'll talk about that as we get toward the end of our agenda today.
Yes, if I can just interrupt or add that the strategic planning process, there's a lot of things that will kind of fall under this larger statement of equity. And for the equity statement, which I'm very excited to kind of have it more formalized, should be the guiding kind of question or the guiding phrase as we move forward into some of these other pieces. And so to answer your question in another way, it should be kind of the framework of all the work that we do moving forward. And it is our kind of our guidepost of this is what we're saying we're doing. Where does this fit? Is it in alignment with what our equity declarative statement as a district is? And that's for all of you as board members. It's for our leadership teams at the district level and also at the building level as things move forward. And to answer kind of where does it fall, I think it will continue to be as, like I said, that guidepost and help drive the work forward. I can't give you necessarily a timeline of this is when we'll do it in January, this is when we'll do it in February, but just kind of having it now kind of in print, so to speak, and make it more formal for all of us. Ms. Shaki, President Shaki, are you okay with me just doing a quick introduction to Brian Eschberger?
Great.
Okay, so good evening to everyone. Thank you again for your work. This is really awesome work that you are embarking upon. And what you're going to have is just a high-level overview this evening with our team. Dr. Brian Eschbacher, has been leading our work with district leaders as well as building leaders and families and stakeholders around our enrollment and equity. He's going to provide a high-level overview for our progress to date with the various stakeholder groups of our enrollment processes, as well as some recommended next steps. And this is also, as he's kind of describing these things, it's from the perspective of the stakeholders. So what people think they experience is what they truly experience. And so he'll kind of walk our board through some of the things that he's discovered as he's facilitated several stakeholder groups and has asked questions. Our team is on panel tonight as well because they've been working very closely with Brian, Mr. Helmholtz, Mr. Atkins, Dr. Gunnell, Ms. Brown, and others on our team have been working very closely just to kind of help facilitate that work. And so with that, I'm going to ask Brian to step forward and walk us through this presentation.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Roby. Can you all hear me okay? Great. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present a project update on the Enrollment Equity Project. I think it's a perfect piggyback on the conversation you all were having, and I was jotting notes as some of the terms you've been using are ones that we've been using over the past 6 months, and so I'm really excited about the connections there. As a brief introduction, my name is Brian Eschbacher. I'm an education consultant focused on K-12 enrollment planning and school choice. Prior to starting in consulting, I spent 7 years at Denver Public Schools as the executive director of the enrollment office and the planning office. And so while we were there, we did a ton of work on enrollment equity. So this is very core to the work I did and a point of passion for me. So it was a pleasure to get to hear your conversation. When we go back over 2 years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting several members of the Grand Rapids team at a conference that was focused on enrollment equity. And so we started having conversations back then. And then as we think back to this past spring, it was like 2 weeks before everything shut down, we decided to move forward with what we're calling an equity diagnostic to understand the areas that are strengths and the areas of opportunities for Grand Rapids as we think about equity of access. So tonight, I'm excited to walk you through an update on that. I'm going to try to share a screen. Please let me know. Does it show up okay? Okay, yeah. Great. And I'm trying to, I'll just make sure to, if you see me looking at a second screen off to the side, it's just so I can keep seeing you all as well. I'd love to make this interactive, so please feel free to chime in with any questions as we're going through it. And of course, we can pause for questions at the end as well. So the areas that I'd like to touch on tonight, let's talk about the project purpose and the definition of enrollment equity. So I know you all just spent a few minutes working on that. We did the same thing in September and October and November. There was quite the wordsmithing exercise. And so President Shockey, I feel for you as you have the shared screen up and many people are looking at the commas. It's an intimidating environment, especially with educators who know the hanging modifiers and the commas and all that. We'll talk about the approach and the progress to date, including some of the preliminary data views that we have. We'll look at the family enrollment journey and how an equitable journey looks like to families. We'll share the benefits that some peer districts have experienced upon increasing enrollment equity. And then we'll talk about next steps, and we'll wrap it up by talking about an update on the 2021 theme application process, which launched last week. We have some early data in and some potential changes given how much of the process is going to be virtual this year. So with that, we can jump in. So the guiding question that started this work as we think back to last spring, what is the current level of equity in the enrollment environment in Grand Rapids Public Schools, and what strategies can be implemented to increase equity of access for students? So I love that we already had access written, and that's something you all were just talking about a few minutes ago. And as we think about the definition of enrollment equity specifically, the definition based on numerous internal stakeholder conversations throughout the fall is we are committed to providing the resources and support necessary for families to research, apply to, enroll in, and attend one of their students' preferred schools. And it's very interesting. You all were just using the term remove barriers. That was in prior versions. And so I'm glad that even though it may not be explicitly written here, it was the same concept of how do we identify those things that might be a barrier to equity, and then how can we remove those to make sure that all students have that opportunity. And so why is this important to the work? Just like you all were describing kind of the scaffolding of district mission and vision, equity mission and vision, equity policies, and then operational policies, we want to use this as an anchor into the future strategic work related to enrollment. Some of the things we work on, everybody's going to get behind. Other things in the enrollment space that I've worked on in other cities, some of them, they can be contentious, right? Some families realize that they may have a really good opportunity right now. They may be opposed to some of the changes. And so I think it's very important at the outset to define why it is that we believe in this work, and so that we have that as an anchor as we're having these community conversations down the road. So that's where the definition is at. When we think about the enrollment diagnostic, there's several elements to it. I am not the most graphical person, so you've probably seen this type of graphic used in the past. But what we wanted to show is this diagnostic of looking at what are the strengths and areas of opportunities related to enrollment in Grand Rapids. And we wanted to look at it through a few different lenses that are closely connected together. And so this is how we've been working over the past few months. We'll start at the top and go clockwise. So we started with a quantitative analysis. I'm a data guy by nature. I think when we deal in things that are emotional by nature, such as K-12 enrollment or K-12 education in general, and then as you think about enrollment of who gets into a school, who doesn't get into school, I think it's very helpful to be able to start with the facts. And so throughout this, we've been seeking out data to help have a conversation based on the facts. Then we wanted to look at policies and processes that are supporting equity or might be holding us back from equity. So this is sort of a qualitative match to the quantitative data analysis. So looking at formal board policies all the way down to operational processes, even down to things as tactical as the matching algorithm that we use to determine that if there's only one seat left in a school, does student A get in or student B get in? So it's got some tiering there in terms of where we're looking at it. Then lots of stakeholder feedback. We're going to, in a second, look at some of that in particular to help add more color to this. And then linking this up with best practices. I think one of the things that's good is this is not a place where Grand Rapids has to be the first mover. I know there's certain elements of the district where it feels like you're inventing the wheel because of the unique environment that Grand Rapids is in. Every city has a different environment related to enrollment, whether it's private schools or vouchers or charter schools or other districts that are surrounding. So all of that is very unique, but I think there's something really good that over the last 10 years, a whole bunch of cities have gone after this work and taken really good steps towards increasing equity. Some of them have hit bumps on the road. Some of them have been very successful, but I think they can all be really good learnings for us. And that's a place where we can lean on for some support as in terms of like these specific ideas that we might go after. So just to kind of double click on that, a bit more detail, what have we been doing in recent months? So I'm going to focus on 3 areas in particular from that previous chart. Let's start with that stakeholder impact. This is stakeholder input. So given COVID happening this fall and given the tensions of not being in person, we decided that it was going to be challenging to talk to families about, future enrollment strategies down the road when they had front of mind questions about, will my student be in person and things like that. I've seen some other cities try these conversations this fall, and it was challenging. I think the families had a lot of emotion. It was there was a lot of recency bias in terms of their perspectives. So it was harder to take that step back and say, yeah, put COVID aside. Let's talk 2 years down the road. It was just hard to do. And so one of the things we made the decision to do in October was to pause on external conversations and focus mostly on internal conversations, knowing that we can come back to external conversations when the time is right. And so that's some of what we're seeing here. Lots of internal conversations. We did focus groups with 31 school leaders representing neighborhood schools, theme schools, elementary schools, middle, high schools to get their perspectives. We met with 5 academic executive directors who provided rich color on the fact that they can support both neighborhood schools and theme schools, so they can see some of the differences there. We met with the equity leadership team, which has 15 members, including principals, and then 13 different departments from the district are represented there. Then we also had detailed department level conversations with the teams that are most closely involved with the enrollment process today. So that's community and student services, communications, and student data systems. And then also the executive cabinet and full cabinet. So lots of internal conversations. In a later slide, we'll talk about next steps on how do we move this forward to external stakeholders as well. When we think about the data analysis, we used theme school application and assignment data, as well as Synergy student information system data to analyze key questions related to participation in the process. How do students preference schools, meaning what type of schools do they list first or second or third? How do they qualify for those schools? And are they being assigned to those schools? And we're cutting that data by student groups. So races, ethnicities, economically disadvantaged status, and IEPs. So those are some of the different ways we've looked at it. And then the last section is the policy process review. So again, this is the qualitative view on this, and we're matching it up with those insights that we're generating either through the data or the stakeholder conversations. And so we're looking at things like the board policy, enrollment process flows, application systems, websites, communication tools, family engagement supports, and then the assignment tools for matching students to schools. So a bunch of different ways to look at that. So let me pause here and see if there's any questions on some of the actions to date and just the structure at which we're looking through this.
I do have a couple questions. As the conversations went, I know that throughout, prior to March, the board was receiving a lot of, and throughout the summer prior, was receiving a lot of questions about our district being two-tier and those inequities. How did those conversations come up in your conversations with our staff?
I think if the first focus group started at 1:30 p.m., the term two-tiered came up at about 1:33. It came up early and often, especially with those school leader conversations and in the department, the district level conversations, it did. And it came up numerous ways with a lot of passion behind it. So that will definitely be a theme that plays, that's not the right word to use. That'll definitely be a trend that plays throughout the presentation that we're working on is how do we start to reduce the gaps between that two-tiered system? A lot of cities have this, and a lot of cities are trying to narrow that, and they're going about it in different ways. And so this is another place where we don't have to be on our own. I think we should be proud of the amazing schools that we have and recognize that we want to take what's working well there and bring it to more schools. And so we've heard a lot of ideas about it, and we're excited to be able to structure those recommendations for you.
And then another question that I had was in regards to student data. And so students that were either below grade level or at or above, and how did some of those, how did that data, how did you sift through that data in order to see what schools were really doing well or not, and then how it relates to the conversation of being school applications to a parent wanting their student to be, at one of the schools that requires certain grades and so forth, and those realities. How did those conversations take place?
Yeah, so I'd like to hold on that question for a few minutes because we're about to show a few of those data slides, but please make sure that if I don't touch on that, let's circle back to it, if that's okay.
Brian?
Yes, please.
Were there any teachers involved in any of these internal stakeholders?
Not yet, but as we'll show in a little bit, they're on the list. And again, it was about how do we, recognizing all the challenges that are happening, with COVID right now, how do we make sure that we're having these conversations in a thoughtful way, but they're absolutely on the list. Okay, well, keep the questions coming, really appreciate it. What I'd like to do for a second is talk about the journey. And this is something that I've worked with different research groups on before. As we take a concept as broad as enrollment, it's helpful to anchor this in the parent experience. And my own kids go to Denver Public Schools. And so I've gone through this as a parent, but I've also gone through structuring this when I was leading that work. And so what we like to think about is how do we identify what the potential steps are in the process, what the potential barriers are at those steps, and then how can we remove those so that they have a better experience? And again, I'm not a graphical expert, but I've tried to use this like road visual before to imagine you have two lanes. And if there's the left lane and the right lane, what we want to make sure is that certain families, maybe those who are more engaged in the process, or however we want to describe group A, the more savvy parents, we want to make sure that they're not able to go faster or more effectively than families in the right lane. And so you can kind of imagine, that throughout the process. So the way that we think about some of these steps is it starts with the concept of school choice. So when I think back to when I grew up, I lived on, Maple Street. And if you live between, Apple Street and Maple Street, you go to elementary A. And if you live between, Nebraska and Zebra Street, you go to elementary B. And that's it, right? Those are the only choices you have. You don't like it, move or go to private school. A lot of families today, that's the environment they grew up in 20, 30 years ago. And so teaching families the concept of choice, that there are these different options that they can have, is very important. It also can be very overwhelming in a city like Grand Rapids, where I might have to learn about private schools, charter schools, other districts, Grand Rapids neighborhood schools, Grand Rapids theme schools. That could be a lot for a family to understand, especially if they have a 4-year-old, right? Something like that, where they're going through this for the first time at a very young age. So that's the first step in the process. Well, then they need to learn about what those different school options are. And again, that can be very overwhelming because within Grand Rapids, I have all these choices, not to mention all those other ones that I just named. Then you have this very personal conversation about understanding what's the right school for me. And so I know as we were starting the meeting, we were having conversations about different colleges. When you think about colleges, you may have taken a tour of the school. You may have visited there and spent a day there, maybe even stayed overnight, and you could have talked to different people that went there. That could be a very challenging conversation to have with like a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old. And then again, to have with an 11 or 12-year-old or a 14 or 15-year-old, is understanding of all these different options based on, my child, what's right. And we also know that for families, and I know this is mine, what's right for one child may not be right for the other child. They might be very different in terms of their interests and their personalities. This is a very personal conversation to a family that can be very overwhelming. So then we think about applying to schools. As I mentioned before, if you're a family, you might be thinking, I need to fill out an application for a neighborhood school, another one for a theme school, another one to another district, another one to a charter school, another one to a private school, right? It could be a lot, and it's not very coordinated, right? That's where you've seen with colleges, they have like the common app, because then I can apply to 100 schools at once without having to, fill out 50 different forms, which can be overwhelming. Then we think about the matching process. How do I get into school A or not get into school A? Well, I got in there, but now I got to let them know by Friday, and I don't even know if I got into school B, right? I owe a deposit over here, and I don't know what's going to happen over there. The timelines aren't coordinated. That can be very overwhelming to a family. Then we might have to think about things like accessing the school. Can I get there with transportation? Can I walk? Is there a city bus? Is there a yellow bus? Is there, something else? So transportation is one example of it, but there might be other examples as well in terms of re-enrolling at a school, or can I be coached out of the school? Do I have to continue to qualify every year? Things like that. And then finally, I'm attending, right? Now, some families go through this entire process in 20 minutes, right? It's super quick. I know I live across the street from a school. I love that school. My child will go there. I'm done. Other families can agonize over this. And maybe you have friends or neighbors that they just, it's like paralysis by analysis, that they just can't figure out which school to go to. So families go through this at different speeds. What we want is to make sure that families have the support to get through all of these steps without walking away from the process. We want them to feel valued and empowered through the process. So I frame this from the family journey. And some of this is now we're able to look at from the data lens. And so this is the first data view that we have. And what we're looking at first is application data. So which are the students who applied to a theme school? We're using 2018-19 data, which might feel a little bit old, but given COVID this past year, we wanted to be careful by overanalyzing data when that kind of kicked in the middle of the process. From the data we do have in 2020, it looks very similar. So, we think this is pretty accurate. What we wanted to look at is the difference between the students who are enrolled in Grand Rapids, which is the bar on the left, and the students who applied for theme schools, which is the bar on the right. And we want to start to see, are there gaps there? All right, so in a pure equity environment, we would want these two bar charts to look as similar as possible. So if I have 39% of Hispanic or Latino students, we would want to have 39% of Hispanic or Latino applicants as well. And then the same for Black and African-American students, and the same for white students, right? We would want to see those bars equal. What we're seeing here at this first view is that there are some gaps. So while working bottom up here, while Hispanic or Latino students represent 39% of students in Grand Rapids, they are only 34% of applicants. So we have a 4 percentage point gap there, 4 to 5 percentage point gap there. For Black and African-American students, we see a 9-point gap. So while 33% of the students in the district are Black or African-American, only 24% of applicants were. As we look at white students, it over-indexes. So white students are 19% of students in the district, but they are 33% of theme school applicants. So they're kind of over-indexing by 14 percentage points. And then the smaller races and ethnicities are there as well. So this is the first view that we have that we're kind of losing some of the steps in that process on a race basis, a race or ethnicity basis that we're seeing there. And then we have another view after it where we're also looking at this. Oh, yep, I'll pause there.
Yeah, may I ask another question? You were talking about these choices of private schools, Christian schools, charter schools, and our schools. We're not really worrying about those other schools. We're just worrying about Grand Rapids Public Schools. Is that correct?
Yes, but the data that we have shows that a very large number of upwards of 60% of the student age population in Grand Rapids is not attending GRPS. And so I think we recognize that we're in a competitive environment. And so yes, these recommendations are going to be specifically for GRPS, but we come to this recognizing kind of the ecosystem that we're in Grand Rapids in terms of the private schools that exist, the neighboring districts that exist, the charter schools that exist. But you are correct that the report will focus on recommendations and insights specific to GRPS.
So Brian, one question about this, this applicants for theme schools, is that take into account out of district students who apply to the theme schools, or are that just current GRPS students who apply to theme schools?
That is a good question. I will get back to you on that. I believe it is just our own GRPS students because we're trying to match the students across systems, but we will confirm that for you.
And I do have a question as well, and it's more of a comment, and this isn't, I don't want to overanalyze things, but because this conversation was kind of framed in a certain way, I just would like to give some thoughts. So on the slide where you showed kind of the roadmap for things, some of the language that was used to frame it is that we may have families or parents who are a bit more savvy or who travel quickly through this process, and we don't want them to travel quicker than others. I would like to propose that, if we're using this analogy of a roadmap, there may be people who can travel quicker through this process because they don't have as many roadblocks as other people. So some families are traveling the same road, but there are several things blocking their path and just making it harder for them to get to that end goal. And so, just like when we're framing this conversation, that kind of stood out to me, because I don't necessarily think that some families are more savvy than others. Just some families don't have the barriers that others have. And so when we're looking at this, especially coming from our last conversation, I'm just saying this on a broad sense, like hopefully we're looking at the numbers and we're seeing the difference, but we're consistently asking ourselves, what are those things that are making it just harder and I know we are, I know that we are, but I just wanted to mention that and note that, so that in the end, it's not necessarily slowing others down, but it's making the flow easier for everyone because they're not running into those roadblocks. Sorry, that was, I just wanted to add that in as we're framing the lens that we're looking through.
Great. Other questions on 7, the applicant rates by race.
I know Ms. Lewis kind of alluded to it. I do want us to go after those
Yes.
private schools and those
Yeah.
charter schools and challenge them to come back, because we offer something as well. So we do want to challenge and perhaps to some extent disrupt. And then the other thing is, to what Ms. Grant alluded to, we're going to be challenged with the barriers that our families and districts live with or are under. And we're going to have to ask ourselves some hard questions about those kinds of things, and how whatever help or whatever things need to happen in order to help our families as well. So as a district, we're going to be challenged to ask hard questions of ourselves and certainly of our families too.
And I'm sorry, last thing, but I think what Reverend Matthias is saying, so if we're looking to go after families who have had the choice to leave, right there, because going to different districts also presents some barriers. So charter school weeds students out certain ways. Private schools weed students out multiple ways, right? So there's reasons why certain families, let's just be honest, certain families, whether they wanted to or not, stayed with GRPS. Right. So as we are going to recruit those other families, if we don't do it correctly, we're just going to create more disparities between the families who have stayed with us and have had to stay with us and the families who have a choice to go wherever they would like. So we really have to address those disparities and make things, we have large disparities. We're just, being honest. We have to create some equality. Well, first of all, we have to choose what's important to us. But if equality is important to us, we have to address that first, and then worry about going to recruit those other people once we have cleaned up our systems. Otherwise, we're just going to create more disparity.
And John, I just want to make myself clear about that. It's not as though I didn't want us to go after those kids, because definitely I do want to go after them. But what I meant was, the work that we're doing here is for our benefit, and part of our benefit would be to get those kids back, not that we're going to help charter schools or anyone else get more kids for their schools. That was my intent of the question. So
great conversation. So building on the previous slide where we looked at applications by race and ethnicity, now we want to look at enrollment we want to zoom in on middle school, where some of the test and theme schools really hit. So we're zooming in on middle school grades 6, 7, and 8. We're doing this for the current school year. So we are getting very current on this one. And we want to look, and it's actually just 6th and 7th grade, correction, but we want to look at the percentage of 6th and 7th graders who qualify for free or reduced lunch at GRPS schools. And so if the district average, I think, is 72%. So ideally, every school would have 72% of students are economically disadvantaged. But what we're seeing is that there's large gaps here. So in neighborhood schools in 6th and 7th grade, 96% of students are economically disadvantaged. So a large break from the district average. Now, theme schools are 70%. So not that far off of the district average. But when we kind of double click within theme schools, we're seeing that there's gaps there. So the test in theme schools, so the 4 criteria schools, so city, economicology, zoo, and museum are much lower. They're at 45% ecodis. So we are seeing these large breaks where, so if you hear the 2-tiered system, this is a place where the student enrollment is kind of having a fork in the road, where students who are more economically disadvantaged are likely to attend a neighborhood school, and the students who are less economically disadvantaged are more likely to attend a test in theme school. So this is, one of those views where we're starting to see a gap here. I'll pause here to see if there's any questions.
This doesn't have anything to do with race, just economics, free and reduced. Okay.
Yep.
Just a correction that the test in school, I think the 4th is Blandford, not museum.
My apologies. Yep.
Yeah,
I just got a text about that. Sorry about that. Yeah, and Ms. Lewis, one of the reasons sometimes we talk about economically disadvantaged, so the Supreme Court has ruled that you can't have any admissions policies that target race or ethnicity. The only thing that is legally allowed is economically disadvantaged. So sometimes you'll see us bounce over to that, and it's because it's the only thing we can act on. So if you were to ever say, well, to have more balancing, we would prioritize students who qualify for free or reduced lunch, or we would hold seats back or something like that. That's what some cities do. That's a reason that sometimes you'll see us, flip from race ethnicity over to economically disadvantaged. Okay, so what would an equitable family experience look like? So let's go back to that journey for a second. So, and I think you all said it well, that there are barriers that some families have. And so it's not about slowing some families down, it's about speeding all families up. So what would this process look like if there was equity? So to start, and really throughout, it's to have support from trusted sources in navigating the process. And that might be learning about different schools, applying to different schools, finding out what the transportation options are. One of the supports that, and we'll share all of this with you, it's like the use of navigators. And so you could imagine some navigator roles work as families are navigating Medicaid applications. They were used during the census process that just wrapped up last year. Some of it might be done during the vaccine process coming up, but having navigators, somebody who speaks your native language, who you trust to talk about something that is personal, that is one of the tools that has been very successful in cities that have different languages or more economically disadvantaged families in their city. So finding a trusted source to help you through the process, that's really important at the start, but it could really go through the whole thing. Another support is I can easily research schools using online tools in my native language. We have lots of examples that I'm excited to share. And this is something that the private market already does. A lot of families go to great schools, they go to Niche, they go to School Digger. There's all these different tools. There might be other ones that are specific nearby, but a lot of families are already doing this. They're certainly talking on social media about, do you like it there? Why should I go there or not? We should try to help have a tool also that makes sure that they can find out about our different options. Some of those sites don't have the most up-to-date data. Some of them are work off of just a popularity contest on who can, which principal, and some private schools will do this, which principal got all their families to write a 5-star review so they bump up the ranking, something like that. But having a tool that works on mobile devices in different languages is key. We can understand, we want families to understand which neighborhood schools and theme schools are right for their child's needs. So not every school might be right for every child. How do we help families understand that very personal conversation of, this is what my child is like, will my child be a good fit at this school? We want to easily apply to different schools in one application in their native language on their phone. Grand Rapids took really good steps here a year ago. We saw the application rates went way up because they created a much easier application to navigate, and it's mobile friendly. So that's a really good step. We would be able to use that as one of those assets to build upon. I, as a family, received an offer to a preferred school in a timely manner. We know, and we've heard about, this neighboring district gives offers out in December. This private school makes you give a deposit in January. We know that there's, some of those timelines that are important. So we have to be cognizant of that. We want families to understand transportation options and any other entrance, criteria or re-enrollment considerations, those types of things, so they have full understanding of the process. And then one that goes throughout also is trust because of transparency. And I really appreciate the previous discussion to this was talking about metrics and transparency with the board's equity policy. I think that's very relevant here. I don't think it's a stretch to say that in our country over the last week, transparency about something very, critical can be a challenge. And this is a place that some families may say, how did kid A get in and my kid did not get in? I don't know if I trust the system. Are they getting in the back door because their friend helped them get in or something? This is a place where trust is very important, and transparency can be really powerful in this process. So this is what we would like an equitable journey to look like. Let me pause here and see if there's any questions. I will also say this is not pie in the sky. This has been done. And I'm very excited to, to keep building this out in detail because, this is just critical that, families being able to, choose what the right school for them is so important. And we know that our competitors are doing it, right? They spend a lot of time figuring out how do we advertise to families? How do we recruit families? How do we, get them in the door? And so I think the districts being able to implement the same strategies, I think will really be powerful. And so we talked about Simon Sinek's start with the why. Why do we want to do this? What are the benefits that it can give to us? Here's a few that we've listed. I am not a salesman. I'm not here to say, hey, if you, do this thing, I promise all of these things. What I'm sharing here is over the last 10 years, a bunch of districts, including those the same size as Grand Rapids, to those that are much larger, to some in the Midwest or on the coasts, some that are very urban with a ton of charters, to some that are not as urban with fewer charters. A lot of them have tried different things. There is no one silver bullet here. And so I think that's key. There's no one solution that will be the magic one for any given city. It's about picking these different pieces. Okay, since we've got a lot of theme schools over here, this type of strategy might help. Since we have high student density over here, this will help. Since we have a lot of English language learners in our city, we need to make sure we have this support in place. Since we have inter-district choice with some surrounding districts that families view as attractive, we want to think about this, right? So there's a lot of different, it's kind of like a menu. You could say, oh, let's take this idea from Indianapolis and this idea from Chicago and this idea from Camden, New Jersey, whatever it might be. But these are some of the outcomes that have come from some of those districts. So we talked about 60% of the student population in Grand Rapids does not go. I think that if we were to unify enrollment, and that's one of the buzzwords you'll hear throughout this, unify enrollment, which is kind of like this package of potential recommendations, I think it will improve this experience for families to find and explore more schools and more easily apply to those and be matched with a preferred school. And I think one of the real keys in that statement is explore more schools, because the thing we heard very early on was the two-tiered system of families do a good job of exploring theme schools and they don't do as much exploring of other neighborhood schools. And we know there's a lot to that. But I think if families realize that there are more schools that can meet their needs, that will help. It'll help reduce the two-tiered system between theme and neighborhood schools, and it'll help families get more excited about more schools in GRPS and not just say, if I don't get into, X school, I'm going to go pursue a different option. And that's really a key of what we're getting at there. We can think about the diversity at our theme schools. As I shared, the students at the test in theme schools. So if we look at 6th and 7th grade, they're more likely to be affluent and they're more likely to be white than students who are attending neighborhood schools. If we increase participation, right, we showed participation rate gaps at the top. If we increase that participation in researching a student's most preferred school, along with reducing barriers, so that's a place we just talked about in the board conversation, it may increase the diversity of theme schools that today do not mirror the overall district's student population. And we're going to have a view in a few slides about the testing at those schools and how that plays out. Streamlined and clearer operations. So this is a bit of a district-centric view, not the parent-centric view, but this is a key benefit to districts that if we use some of the technology solutions that have been developed over the past few years, it can reduce some of the manual operations that are needed today. This can allow your resources to better focus on engaging families. So instead of having people that are typing in like hard coding data, get those people on the phones talking to families about what the different options are for them, answering questions for them. So this is about kind of retasking your staff. And as also using them, the staff that you have to collaborate with other departments and schools to help connect enrollment to their missions, right? So one of the things we heard, and this will bridge into the next one, neighborhood schools don't feel like they have the support to market to families. This is not a core competency that every school has. And so we're gonna have to build up that muscle a little bit on articulating your elevator pitch and what makes you great. This is a place where the staff can help with that. But with that balanced quality set of schools, providing families with the tools to research those schools and then helping those schools articulating their mission, that can reduce some of those perceptions of a two-tiered system. And the last one I touched on was transparency. So unifying the process, we can share real-time wait lists, we can create metric scorecards to increase public transparency. and likely overall trust and satisfaction. Another thing districts have done when they've put in this type of solution, they form a transparency committee. It could be a mix of board members, maybe a researcher or professor from the local university, a few parents, somebody from a nonprofit. You kind of get this group together that they create like a student data privacy agreement, and they can look through all the data and say, why did student A get in ahead of student B? It's because of this. They had a sibling, they had a better lotto number, but it's all transparent. It's all on the level. There's no kind of wizard behind the curtain for this. So let me pause there for a second before we talk about next steps.
Yeah, Brian, this is a small thing. I don't know if this is going to be a front-facing document for anyone else, but that top one has a small typo, the potential for increased enrollment, just and estimated as opposed to and estimated.
Great, thank you.
It's a small thing. I do want to underscore, I really like that idea of, and that third one, as far as allow central office staff to be more of a resource. But I will say, and maybe this is to Dr. Roby's benefit, a critique that I've heard from community folks, as well as even our own other district staff, frankly, is that sometimes our central office staff doesn't necessarily have a customer service sort of orientation to them. I've heard people repeatedly say that they maybe felt a little turned off to some degree about how they've been engaged with from some of our front-facing staff at the district level. So I guess just throwing that out there, just in general, that I do think we could leverage those folks to engage with families, but we may need to have some service training, frankly, if we do go that route.
Great. Other
Customer service, I'm just responding, always customer service is something that we should be working towards, and not taking us down a different path. But yep, I've heard similar comments, and that's something that we have talked about at the district level, about how do we make sure that our intentions and our actions support what buildings and our stakeholders are looking for. So duly noted.
Other questions or comments about this before we move on to next steps?
Yeah, I'd like to ask about lottery. Now, if a kid applies for a school for 6th grade and doesn't get in, then in 7th grade, does that lottery number stay with the kid, or is there a whole new lottery so that the kid could go back down to, the very bottom? And, each year, does your lottery number change, or do you stick with the number you got when you first applied?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's an example of an area that you would make the policy decision or the process decision on that specific area. So some districts do carry it forward that if you didn't get in 6th grade, it kind of bumps you up the wait list for 7th grade. Other districts wipe the slate clean and say, reapply, it's a fresh batch of students for 7th grade. But there's a lot of areas around lottery that can be customized based on what the district feels is best.
Do you know, or Dr. Roby, maybe you know, what do we do? Do we start with a new lottery each year, or?
Mrs. Lewis, I do not know. I will certainly ask our team what has been our practice. I'm not familiar with what we've done, whether you keep the same lottery number or if it goes back in the hopper.
Okay.
Dr. Roby, I see that Mr. Atkins is on the call.
Yes. Currently, you get a new number. It doesn't go from one. It doesn't follow you from one year to the next, and so you have to reapply the following year.
Yeah, and that's typical because I had this when I applied for my son as a 3-year-old. We had it was from 1 to 1,000,000, and we were 900 something thousand. If he had to keep that number, I don't know if he would ever get into a school. He would still be at home with me. So you typically want to wipe the slate clean and not have it carry over from one year to the next. But again, those are areas that districts can customize. You know, how do we want to think about prioritizing a group over another group, that type of thing.
Because the opposite can be a problem as well. You know, you can be number 18 and then 7th grade comes and now you're number 25, and then 8th grade comes and now you're number 35. So the kid never gets in. So I do worry about that, because it's just because when I was working at Aberdeen, I would have parents talk to me about the fact that they'd tried to get their kid in, and you know, each year they seem to have another number, and how come they can't save that spot because they've been trying to get in for 3 years, you know. So that's my thing.
Other questions or comments about this slide for next steps?
I do like, you know, some of the things that you point out in your headings in regards to, you know, what I see some of the struggles that we're going to have. I think definitely the technology part and streamlining our online systems so that they're not cumbersome was a huge difficulty, and it seems as though that's changing for the better in regards to parents being able to get accurate information, timely information, and information that they can submit and have confidence that it was gotten, and then not find out because they didn't get communicated to that, oh, we lost it, or it whatever, and then all of those kinds of things. I think it's really critical to be able for those heads of those schools to be able to have some control, as opposed to it just being centralized somewhere out there, but that the principal actually has some control of some of those pieces, so that they can help their families both apply if they're reapplying, and then also those that want to apply and are able to get the information in and whatever's going to happen. So I'm glad to see that we've moved forward in some of those areas and still need to work on some.
Okay, great. So next steps planned over the next 3 to 6 months. So we talked about community engagement. We have a parent action leaders meeting in late January. That will be the start of it. And then one of the other pieces is we have a survey that is included as part of the application for families to fill out. And one of the questions in there is an open-ended question about, do you have any suggestions for us about the process and the way we can improve your experience? And then in addition, there's a few other quick questions. One of the things we've done in the past, or I've supported cities with in the past, is use that kind of general large information gathering phase to then kick off very specific focus groups. So we've had parent conversations before that are kind of very general of tell me about your experience, but what we want to do is get kind of specific with them. So as we start to see some narratives around it's difficult to apply, okay, great, let's go deeper on why you're hitting some roadblocks there. If it might be on understanding what the right option is for my child, great, let's talk about how we can help support families there. If it's about transportation or re-enrollment, something like that, great, we can go deeper. So what we want to do is gather this larger survey data and then kick off focus groups with families to dive more deeply into those. And then we also talked about teacher and secretary engagement as well. We talked to principals. We want to make sure we're getting different perspectives there as well. So that'll be upcoming. We'll have a broader report out on data findings and then other insights with school leaders and central office departments. And then as we're getting these other conversations, we grab those quotes and put those in as well so you can hear their perspectives. And then we'll finalize the enrollment equity diagnostic and an implementation roadmap. So knowing that you can try to bite off all of this at once in 1 year, some cities have done that. you might say, let's do the first half, let's get that stabilized, and we'll take on the next part and we'll get that stabilized, knowing that some parts are complementary and some of them are more like sequential. Do this first and then, do that next. So those are our steps over the next 3 to 6 months. Before we, yeah.
Right, I'm sorry. This theme application, including a survey to gather feedback, has that been sent to anyone who's already applied?
It's included at the end of the application that you take. Yep. So it's been up for the last week.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I encourage people to take it. Survey response rates are important. So
with the 3 to 6 months planning, where in this planning is the board going to get an update in relation to how the plan is going, how the implementation is going, or that kind of stuff? How do you see that happening?
Yep. So I think these actions are going to, obviously a lot going on with return to in-person learning. These will continue later this month. I think before it's finalized, we'll be back to update the board. And then you would be able to see the full roadmap of here's what we're recommending to implement for the 2021 cycle, right? So kind of 12 months from now, and why and what that entails. And then what we may want to recommend to kick to a following year to say, let's bite off all this first, and let's do the second. So you'll see all that before it formally launches.
Awesome.
So I'm putting a little bit of a range because I feel like anytime we put a timeline together with COVID, it's wrong. So I'm intentionally being a little broader with the months. Could be on the 3-month side if things go really well, but just recognizing that we do want to get through all of these. I think it'll make us much stronger to have these diverse perspectives, and then that'll help us move forward more effectively. So we've used the term go slow to go fast, and I think this is an example of making sure we have a lot of input up front. We don't want to get halfway down the road and then realize we missed something big and then have to backtrack. Okay, what I'd love to do, the last item we had, I wanted to kick it over to Mr. Atkins to help here. So we wanted to talk about the 2021 application process that opened last week. Mel, can I ask you to help chime in here?
Not a problem. And so the application window just opened on January 4th, and we extended the window through February 26th. And the biggest reason why is we want to give families a better opportunity to make the right choice, and at the same time, making a choice of coming back either hybrid or staying virtual. There's a lot of things going on with that there. So the window goes from January 4th to February 26th. As of this afternoon, when we checked the data, there was already 414 applications, and that's approximately 120 over kind of this 2-week period that we had last year, and it was we did pretty well last year as well. So we're pretty excited about that number already. Because of COVID, we can't do our normal choice expo, so we're holding a virtual expo on February 18th. From 6 to 7:30, and there will be lots of communications coming out around that. But February 18th from 6 to 7:30, and the piece I want to say on this one is it's not a theme school application. A theme school expo is for all schools, and so this is an intentional step into really include all our schools, and because everyone has a lot to offer, and this is one we really want to promote. And then another big one here is the testing schools. The testing schools, traditionally what we have done the last, this is my time, more than 5 or 6 years ago under Teresa Brother O'Neill, was you had to be on, students had to qualify, in order to qualify for a testing school, you had to be on grade level or meeting the 50th percentile in math and reading. And what we're doing this time is we're saying trying to make it more equitable for students is meeting the 50th percentile, math or reading. And we look at the testing dates behind it. Last spring we didn't have MAP testing because of COVID. And so we're including a few different testing options that students can qualify under. And so you look at the previous fall of 19 and winter of 2020 were the last two tests that were given in person. And so that was very important. We did not include, and then we did not include, you see, fall of 20, this previous fall. And the reason why is because the test was given remotely, and that should be, we're very cautious to use any criteria around that test because of the testing conditions. You really can't control that when it's virtually. And so we're going back, the map testing window is going to open in a couple of weeks. So if you're in person, those scores can count in winter or spring as well. And looking at the data, kind of the reason why we think this is the best way to go. If you look at how you read this chart, is blue is if you include it, it was and math and reading. And then the green represents either one, math, like, or reading. And so what this is showing you, starting with, we used the last test that was in person, the last winter map test that was in person in winter of 2020. And as you can see, as the green goes up through each area, but you pay attention to, for example, the first bar under black, it goes from 8% of the students were eligible under the old testing criteria, and it bumps up to 25%. In Hispanic, 14% to 35%. You see it increases. By doing this small tweak, twice as many students will qualify under this testing criteria, 3 times as many Black students and twice as many Hispanic students will qualify, changing it from an and to an or. Now we know that by doing this, things have to be done at the school level in order to make this work. With this change and around strategies to support students that are struggling. There's some other things that we have to do, and we don't want to wait for a student to begin to get behind, but really put in supports so they have those. That happens all the time at neighborhood schools, and it happens too at theme schools. So I'll stop there for a second. Are there any questions, either what Brian said or kind of the last 2 slides that I went over?
This is Kim Williams. I have a question with regards to the enrollment for this year. Is that a multi-school application again, as we were hearing about? Is that what that is, or was it just the one school? And then my second part to the question is, with regards to those students that may have the qualifications for the either or in math or reading, are they being reached out to and encouraged to apply for those opportunities as well?
And so let me take the first part of your question. The process we're using this year is the process we've used in the past, and you have 3 options you can pick from, and you rank them: option A, option 1, option 2, and option 3. And so that still applies. Some things that we want to do moving forward, as we eventually get, to more concrete recommendations, once we go through all kind of the role groups that we want to talk to, we're probably going to have, some more changes with that. But right now, you just rank them 1, 2, and 3, as you have done in the past. Now I see John jumped on. John, can you talk to about?
I can chime in on the other one. So, Ms. Williams, what we have been doing, really as part of our response to the Office of Civil Rights complaint many moons ago, we run a list of all students who are eligible, with emphasis on our non-white students, and we target them with communications, direct mail, chase with phone calls, and we are planning to do the same thing this year using the either or list that is the expanded list.
I guess one of the concerns that I would have is that, you know, and Mr. Atkins alluded to this with the green charts, is that you have to, or there needs to be a greater amount of resourcing to the schools in order to help the students maintain or get to an academic level, because you know that they're going in lacking. Is that correct? And so my question would be, how are you working with your administration in proposing this to them? If we do this, it means that you're going to need more resource teachers, or, you know, and on and on and on, correct?
And so before this came, you know, the each school was part of the conversation, and everyone, you know, we looked at it each way, and there was a lot of concerns voiced. One thing that the schools were able to do the last few years is they do get extra funds, grant funds, either $31A or Title I dollars, to provide additional support for identified students. And so some of the things that schools have done in the past is additional counseling support, or mental health support that really comes along. Sometimes it's peer professionals. There's other ways, but we know we have to dig deeper. It's not enough. We know we're going to have to really work together with the principals, with the teachers, to figure out the best way to, because it's easy to change something on paper, but it's harder to change kind of the culture of really what the school is.
I think it also very much aligns with even the work that you all were wrestling with earlier this evening in this board meeting, where you were talking about removing barriers. And so looking at the data and deciding how do we, again, remove barriers, and not just remove them from a physical standpoint, but then also structural barriers that we have in place, and providing some different supports. And as Mr. Atkins alluded to, it's not just also those social emotional components, it's additional resource teachers, it's extended programming before school, after school, and other opportunities to make sure that students who want to attend certain schools, that we're providing we're providing some scaffolded support so that they're able to not only go, but then also stay, because they're feeling successful and they're feeling connected to those schools.
A question on accessibility and equity with respect to special ed students, special needs students, and ELL students at some of our theme schools. Are we analyzing the data with respect to how many participants there are from these subgroups at our theme schools and at our test-in schools?
Yes. So for all the students who we have, it's asked on the application. So that's one point where we capture it. But if it's misidentified in the application, when it shows up in the student data system, we capture it there, and we are planning to look at those gaps. Knowing that the special education one I looked at yesterday, there are large gaps there as well in terms of students participating who have identified IEPs versus those who do not. There are large gaps. So that's another place that we'll be looking at.
So you'll be sharing some of that data with us in the future, so we might have a perspective there.
That's correct.
Also a question related to the predominant ethnic background of staff in theme schools, neighborhood schools, and test-in schools. Are you looking at that configuration and comparability?
So we're not going to focus on that as much. However, one of the areas that we're recommending is to conduct similar equity diagnostics at adjacent district functions. So one of the things I've seen before is if we try to look at every element, this could take a while. And so some districts have tried to do that, and it could go on for a while. And one of the things we spoke about over the summer is, knowing that the board was having conversations about equity, we wanted to do a deep dive in this area, and then hopefully create something of a template that can be used when we think about school finance, when we think about hiring and staffing, discipline, behavior, curricular materials, all the things you mentioned at the start of this meeting. And so we're going to do a deep dive on enrollment in this, but you're absolutely right that once you get into the four walls of the building, it all becomes relevant. The student experience is impacted by all of those. And so this is going to be one deep dive that hopefully will be easily connected to these other diagnostics that can be done per the board conversations you had earlier. And then hopefully those connections will be made.
Okay, if not through this avenue, perhaps a report from human resources or something that we might be able to have a perspective with respect to the predominant ethnic background of staff in our theme schools and our test-in schools as compared to our neighborhood schools. I think that that's fairly relevant and important because there's a direct connection between teachers of color in our neighborhood schools and the populations that are served. And certainly, while that is a positive impact where we have, those neighborhood relationships, it also would be an attractive element or ingredient to have a reflective mirroring of the community in schools that are theme schools and test-in schools. And so I would ask, in a humble manner, to see if that would be something that might be forthcoming, either through this study or through our human resources.
I captured that as a request, Dr. Flores. I will look into that. I think, but I don't know. So we'll have to do some investigating to see if we're able to break down demographics of staff by building. I do recall when I was researching the district, just interestingly enough, it did have kind of the overall demographic of the staff by the district. But of course, I didn't have that level of detail by building, but we can certainly look into it and get back to you.
Thank you.
I think too, as we look at conversations that we have with families perhaps desiring their children in these choice schools, the challenge becomes to family structure and how that family is structured for success, whatever that might look like, and then the supports to perhaps get there if they need those supports. It's one thing to want my kid to be successful, but if I can't support that in my family, it's gonna be more difficult for my child. And so having realistic conversations with ourselves and with our families in regards to what that looks like as they pursue these options and these dreams and desires that they have too.
Brian?
Mm-hmm.
Did that just cut out or?
No.
Yeah, people froze on me for a second too, and I don't know if I got all of Reverend Matias's statement at the end because everybody just froze. So I'm glad to see it wasn't just me.
Any other closing thoughts?
And I'm curious if you can share who, maybe like the top 3 districts who have undergone a similar study and then utilized unified enrollment to close achievement gaps. Who do you point to as having success?
Yeah, I think I'm very biased, and we can share summary materials with you that are pretty digestible. They're not like pure technocratic stuff. So Denver leaned heavily in on this for the past 10 years. I joined it right after it launched and led that work for a while. But Denver, Colorado is in a choice environment similar to Michigan, where you can choose neighboring districts. Denver is surrounded by a lot of affluent districts, and so we were losing thousands and thousands of students to private schools and to neighboring districts. And the district kind of had this line in the sand moment of, we're going to compete. We recognize what families are doing and we're going to compete. And so Denver is one of the proof points. that we'll share information from. Indianapolis is one that has done really good work over the past few years. Very similar story. The geographic area that is more in the city core has a higher percentage of students that are economically disadvantaged. And so you have a lot of families that are choosing into kind of the inner ring suburbs where there is, free inter-district choice. So they have put a lot of work into this effort. Tulsa is one that I've been working with in the past year that has their version of city high school. And so they've been figuring out how to look at the two-tiered system and kind of raise all boats. And so those are three that we'll look at, but there's a few other examples. I mean, New Orleans post-Katrina did some very innovative things. Washington, D.C. has done some very innovative things. And I can even share examples from Camden, New Jersey, which is very similar in size to Grand Rapids. So I'll promise to make it digestible, and hopefully if that sparks some specific questions that we can go deeper on those. But those are places that have a lot of the similar kind of elements in place that Grand Rapids has, and have really leaned in on this from the family perspective to try to improve the experience, and then as a result, improve what their district enrollment is.
Fantastic, thank you. Colleagues, any final questions for Brian?
Would you be able to send us this information that you presented to us?
Sure.
Ms. Lewis, I do have the report, and after the board meeting, I will just forward on this actual PowerPoint, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Roby, I'll send you an updated version that corrects typos. So
okay, thank you.
A lot of pride in that. So I'll share that, and then I'll also share kind of the digestible city profiles, so you can kind of see some of that examples.
Perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, Brian, thank you so much. As somebody who loves data, this has been very life-giving. So I really, really appreciate the deep dive, your work alongside our district leadership, and really the opportunity to present us to get better, which is what we are working toward here. So thank you.
Great. Thank you all. Have a great night.
You as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that leads us into our two discussion items this evening, board retreat planning and strategic planning. So what is customary is that we would meet as the Board of Education in either February or March for a full day retreat. I would suspect that will look very similar to how October looked for us. So probably an opportunity for hybrid, depending on your level of comfort, meeting in person or attending virtually. But what I want to talk about and bring Mr. Helmholt forward is its alignment with our strategic planning. So this year we have the exciting opportunity to work with our new superintendent on developing our next multi-year strategic plan. In doing so, we'd like to issue an RFP for a facilitator or consultant to help walk through that process. And it would make sense to me that our board retreat would align with the timeline of that strategic planning, so we can use all this amazing data we've had from the equity enrollment audit to the facilities audit to our enrollment study and projections to really inform the work ahead. So John, I'm going to kick it over to you to talk about the RFP.
Thank you so much, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Roby. We're excited to begin this conversation with you. We know that we've been talking a lot about strategic planning, and I know pre-COVID, I think Dr. Roby was eager for that to be some of the first steps as opposed to trying to fly the COVID plane as we were gearing up for start of school. But what we've done, and as you know, as a board, our guiding light, our North Star has been the GRPS transformation plan. Now that plan is now 8 years old. That was done in 2012. It had multiple phases, and it took into account a lot of different data points, some of which even dated back to 2008, which was the last time we did a comprehensive building improvement plan, which is what contributed to the passage of our bonds. So the timing of this is perfect in that, we're still navigating our way through COVID, and which will likely certainly go as much into the next school year as we know at this point. But we also know we need to make some strategic decisions, and that begins with developing a comprehensive process for how we're going to do strategic planning. And as what we've done is started to research what are the core elements of strategic planning? And everything that I've seen, certainly, and what we've been looking at from a research standpoint, emphasizes that formalizing, developing, and issuing the RFP is one of the most important aspects of this process. It's how we get out of the gate, how we are really forced to define, organize, detail, and document what are the requirements and expectations of the board, of the administration, and of other stakeholders. We need to look at this RFP from how can it be concise, well-written, well conceived, and making sure we're thoughtful in how and where we're going to distribute it so that we can get high quality proposals from a diverse group of entities, ideally those who have some experience with schools and maybe even more so with urban public schools. That certainly not limited to that, but that's part of this process. That's part of what we believe needs to go into this. And so we're going to want to look at how do we detail every aspect of the proposed requirements and what is expected. Examples are going to range from, the price, how much is it going to cost, the timeline, and the ability for the consultant to meet that timeline and possibly to be flexible with the timeline in light of the curveballs that have been thrown to us with COVID. The quality of the deliverables, the vendor's location, the vendor's knowledge and experience in and around Greater Grand Rapids, in and around Michigan, with schools, with urban schools. These are many of the different factors that go into decision-making for how boards and districts have embarked on a strategic planning process and the development of an issuance of an RFP with the ultimate review of those proposals and the commencement of the strategic planning process. And so a couple of the core elements that go into a strategic planning RFP will include some of the basics, things that you, of course, would expect. The submission details. What are the deadlines? Who's the district point person for clarifying questions? What are the contact information to get in touch with the district? The next, and this is very common, is an introduction and executive summary. What is the reason behind this? What's the scope of the project? Introduction to the district, and really why we're looking to go about doing an RFP. Background information about our schools, our district, the city of Grand Rapids, our region, our demographics, the culture, community, student population, city of Grand Rapids population, some of the fundamentals that would provide a high level picture, frankly, not unlike what you as a board did with the profile for the superintendent search, where you outlined several of those things that may be attractive to prospective candidates, in this case, prospective vendors that may be willing to submit a proposal. And then, of course, is the meat and potatoes of it, which are the detailed specifications, requirements, and the scope of service. And this is the purpose of the RFP, the characteristics that will define successful solution, the qualitative measures and requirements that will drive vendor selection process, and the scope of the work. So within this is also defining the core audiences, who are our key stakeholders, what are expectations around internal, external stakeholder engagement. And I know that's something that we did an extensive process in 2012 and have since had some other sessions, but that's part of what feedback we'd like to get from the board is what is your vision for that stakeholder engagement. And then, of course, there may be some assumptions and constraints, terms and conditions. What selection criteria, are we going to use for determining which vendor to select to consult us on our strategic planning? And then submission guidelines and schedules. And that's everything from the release and distribution of the RFP, deadline for vendors to submit written questions with written answers that are provided to all the interested vendors, which is not uncommon with most RFP processes, deadline for RFP, when the finalists will be notified, when the vendor selected, and then when the vendor signs. Then, of course, what's the any kind of fiscal constraints, what's the budget, what's the timeline. So that's kind of a high level overview of what we're looking for input and feedback about that we can gather from you from other stakeholders of what we want to see in this RFP. And we would gather that from you and others. And then our intent would be to draft the RFP and bring a draft to the board for your review.
What is your ideal timeline from the district perspective to release the RFP? Probably goes hand in hand with what we want, right?
I think this is something, and then Dr. Roby, help me out on this, but I think this has been one of the challenges because right now we're so heavily focused on the implementation of our return to learn plan and the hybrid in-person learning and the virtual model. And so I think we struggled with that because the other part of a strategic planning process is that that community engagement, the internal external engagement, and the quality of which and the quantity of which may be limited in a COVID environment. And so we honestly, we've kind of struggled with what that is. I think that's something we need to chew on and push and pull a little bit. But obviously you had presentation from Plant and Moran about some of the facilities related issues. You've certainly had presentations from Mr. Oberst about some of our fiscal realities. I think we've seen the enrollment projections. And so there is some looming data that's there that is necessary to help guide decisions. And the reality is what is feasible, what is realistic, but how do we ensure that it's done with fidelity and it is authentic engagement with a full level of transparency. So you have the buy-in and ownership from our stakeholders once we're done. I think that was one of the beauties of the transformation plan is once we got to the end of that, and mind you, remember, we closed 10 schools, yet you had unanimous approval from the Board of Ed. You had unanimous approval of the City Commission and the Mayor, both state reps, both the state senator, the Kent County Commission officials, 50 plus pastors. You had a widespread community support for that plan, which is also what contributed to the momentum and the success of that plan, which led to 6-7 years of increased graduation rates, a stabilization of enrollment, even a couple years of increase in enrollment, and a change in public perception that really contributed to a lot of that success. So that how do we use this process and this timeline in an effective way to really generate buy-in and momentum for once we implement the plan, we've got to keep it going from there. It can't be a one and done and something that sits on the shelf that just gathers dust.
And I would certainly reinforce all that you have shared. I think, again, it's chicken and eggs everywhere from the standpoint of which comes first. And there's lots of different things where there's some opportunities. We want to make sure that it does make sense so that we don't get too far ahead of any one thing that we are planning. And we are very thoughtful about what comes first and then next, and then also having the flexibility to be adaptable to whatever's taking place. We talked about this earlier today from the standpoint of we do want to make sure, and using the example that Mr. Helmholtz just went through with the transformation plan of all the various stakeholders, that was all pre-COVID. And so what the story that we tell ourselves is if we are in a virtual format and still trying to engage our stakeholders, will it look the same in a virtual format versus in another opportunity where people can be face-to-face and who are not as technologically comfortable using this as a way to interact? And so we want to make sure that we don't further disenfranchise or not include certain voices because of accessibility, especially as after we just got done talking about how do we remove barriers, and so that doesn't mean that the work won't continue, but we just want to be really thoughtful about what are some creative ways that we can still engage those who may not have as many access points.
So I would just add, I'm sorry, just, as you think of the development of this RFP, one of the things we could include in the scope of work is how the consultant would address strategic planning and engagement in a COVID-related environment. I'd be curious to see what innovation they may bring to the table, but it's a matter of simply posing that question to see how the proposals may respond to it.
So I just like to add, it sounds like we have really big decisions to make, especially based on the presentation about the budget and the facilities. I think it would be better for us to make those decisions after strategic planning rather than before. Otherwise, we're making decisions. And since those are kind of looming decisions, I'd like to see that we move forward as quickly as possible, especially since the RFP process takes some time. John, you laid out a whole lot of questions that we need to ask to be answered before we put together an RFP. And to some extent, that's work that the board can do because the board isn't engaged in the return to learn planning. And so I don't know, or anyone else that we might want to be engaged in answering that question. Certainly there's some templates out there. I would say that another example of community engagement that we had, other than the last strategic plan, was also the superintendent search process that we had quite a bit of community engagement and ideas generated. That's not the same thing, but I think that it was a good model of something that got done fairly rapidly in, a month or so time. I'm not suggesting that we do that, but I like to get the RFP going as quickly as possible, and then someone to tell the board what we need to do to get it done as quickly as possible. So that way we can get out there and see what we get back. That's just my thoughts.
Dr. Baker, does it make sense with some of the questions, the open-ended questions that John was kind of ticking off as he was talking? Does it make sense to put that in some sort of structure, and then we can have a conversation about what that looks like, but just to give the questions ahead of time for people to kind of just begin to ruminate on themselves individually, and then talk about when there's an opportunity for the full board to come together to then decide what are the next steps. And I'm just kind of, based on what you're saying, I'm just trying to think about our process.
That's what I was thinking, even just like an open-ended survey monkey type thing that says, what do you think are our stakeholders? And what, and just so we can kind of start thinking through, and then we'll see each other's, rather than doing it. Obviously we're a board of 9 wordsmithers, so we don't want to do it all in a meeting, but I think that at least we get, and then we'll probably have a lot of overlap, but we'll also, and in the end, we can say, okay, well, this is the working. I don't know how many questions, but John had a lot of questions there. That would take a lot of time to answer in a meeting, but we could probably write down in a survey response, and then we could all get a chance to read each other's responses. Maybe have a committee determine the final thing, or and then have it board.
Yeah, I think all those suggestions are great. I like the idea of both the survey, and I was thinking just a short-term ad hoc committee, perhaps, to put it into a draft form so that the board can then comment after that. So Dr. Roby and Mr. Helmholt, why don't I plan to connect with you in the next day or two to develop the process, and then we'll round back with the board on the timeline for the RFP development.
Okay, and would that we also include some potential dates for a study or a retreat as well as part of that survey?
That's probably wise. Yeah, let's do that. That sounds great.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion about board retreat or strategic planning? Okay, we do have public comment this evening, so I'm going to invite forward 2 members of the public who'd like to have us listen tonight. So let me look at my notes. First, we have Jennifer Hutchison, and then also Jill Gleason. So Craig, if you could bring those 2 people forward, please.
Ms. Shockey?
Yes.
I have to read the rules. Should I do it now?
Sure, it'd be great. Thank you, Ms. Lewis.
Individuals should have registered for public comment a half an hour before the meeting. Registered individuals will be called on and admitted by our meeting moderator during the public comment period. Public comment is for agenda and non-agenda items during the virtual format. Please check our website under Notice of Regular and Special Board Meetings and click on the posted meeting for information concerning registration or call our hotline. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per person. You will need to state your full name before providing the comment. You will then be timed for 3 minutes, and you will be given a 1-minute notice. And you need to complete your comments upon being notified that the 3 minutes have passed. Board members do not respond to public comment, concerns brought to the attention of appropriate staff, and we value your input and thank you for sharing.
All right, thank you, Ms. Lewis. And I see Ms. Hutchison there. Do we have you? You're still on mute. Jennifer, are you there? All right. Craig, how about our second? Jill Gleason.
President Shockey, there is no one by that name in the room.
Okay. All right, Jennifer, one last try. Do we have you this evening? Okay, I'm sorry that that's not working out. We'll reach back out to our public